So, the way I do this podcast, and really any of the other content I create, whether it's on for the Broken Silicon podcast, the Die Shrink podcast, or the Moore's Law's Dead channel, or any of the articles I write, well, I have ADHD, and so what I tend to do to be the most productive is have 5 different projects or more I'm working on at the same time. Then when the inspiration hits me, I work on one. I try to build myself out to be able to do a bunch of different things at the same time and make those things that I'm doing completable within a few days. Otherwise, like a dog, I'll just catch something else shiny and move on to want to do that. I get bored easy and I get distracted easy. But ADHD has its benefits. I have a lot of energy, and when I am passionate or driven to complete something, I tend to be able to hyper focus on it. But when it comes to flyover states, there are a few episodes I'm working on right now. The struggle, though, is that unlike Broken Silicon, which really requires very little prep work, just requires time, or Moore's Law's Dead YouTube channel, which really just requires an idea and I can get it done in a day, I got to make sure I get my facts right. I got to make sure I don't put my foot in my mouth. We're talking about things involving history, race, culture, politics on flyover states. And so I can't just, spit something out. I refuse to. I think that, in fact, a big thing going on right now that is causing so many problems in the world is that Twitter mentality of just spitting something out and seeing where the cards fall. It's causing a lot of confusion. It's causing a lot of people to get mad at other people that maybe meant something, didn't mean something. And there's a time and a place for spitting things out. Comedy is all about spitting things out and hoping you make someone laugh and just knowing that, hey, it was a joke. That one wasn't good. Don't get mad at me. But again, in politics, I don't think that's how that works. So I've been struggling to get out episodes of flyover states, and, well, I don't know if I want to say lucky, but lucky for you, I had something hit me. And it was 9/11. I looked at the calendar and I was like, oh my God, that's almost here again. It doesn't really even feel like something we remember that much anymore, and I don't even know if that's a bad thing, Time heals all wounds, and the fact that we don't all have to go into full mourning anymore maybe means we're healing. But there's still a lot of memories out there that I have and emotions I felt on that day, and I don't need to fact check those. I don't need to. I don't need to fact check what I felt, what I saw, or even what I remember. I think a lot of people, and this is, if you look into some of the newer studies coming out that show that actually eyewitness accounts in the courtroom are the least accurate thing you can do. People tend to literally create memories in their mind that didn't happen. It's something I don't have. I'm very, very careful to only remember what I'm sure I'm remembering correctly, and then I clear my brain out like an Etch-a-Sketch of the things that I'm not sure if they actually happened. It causes me to sometimes seem stupid as I don't remember things other people do. But, I only trust the memories I'm 100% sure on and that I sometimes can even verify for myself. So I think my memories of what I actually saw happened. And the reason I say all of that long-winded, what's my point? A lot of people remember watching TV on 9/11. This is a common thing. And then other people will say, that were their family members, oh no, you were at work, you couldn't have been at home watching TV with me. And they'll say, no, I swear I was. And then they'll say, well, here's an email proving it. And they'll go, oh, I thought I was at home watching TV. I'm not going to lie. So what you're going to get from me is an honest account. I won't lie and say that I knew everything that was going on when it happened, or I don't even know if you call it a lie if you're not trying to lie, but I won't misremember. What you're going to get, I think right now, is an accurate account. But this podcast will be broken into 3 acts. So the first act will be just what I remembered when it happened. The second act will be, well, let's call it nuggets in my memory that my brain has clearly categorized into just after 9/11, although I'm sure a lot of those memories were actually a year or 2 years after. But these will be the after 9/11 memories my brain is categorized with that event that I'm sure didn't happen close to it. But we're still in that, early 2000s haze of war that was going on in America. Well, and it's still going on. And then the third act is going to be just looking back at everything I said and going, how do we even think about 9/11 anymore? So, I guess if you're supposed to remember, I'll give you one memory from that day. That memory is my own. Let's get started. So when 9/11 happened, I was 9 years old. I went to this elementary school, Lincoln Elementary School in Mundelein, Illinois. At the time we were living in Chicago, or a suburb of Chicago. My parents, of course, worked within the city. And of that morning, September 11th, 2001, I remember nothing besides that the weather was nice. And it's funny how many other people in the United States say the weather was nice. I'm sure the weather was nice where I was, though. And we know, of course, that it was in the Northeast as well that day. So, anyways, that's it for the morning. The human brain is funny. Our brain knows to only record things we need to keep, or at least things that our brain thinks we need to keep. And anything we only have so much space, so it just throws stuff out that it thinks, they don't need this. So, by the way, sorry, teachers who have a bunch of kids not remembering your class from the previous day. It means those kids' brains think what you told them isn't worth anything. So, that's where you got to get creative with teaching. But yeah, whatever we did in the morning, I don't remember. But I do remember after lunch. I remember the look on my teacher's face, Mr. Guide. It was like she had seen a ghost. Somber. Terrifyingly stoic. Those are the words that come to mind to describe her face. She took us into the hallway and had us sit pretzel style, or I guess back then they did call it Indian style, on the floor, face our lockers and put our heads down. In hindsight, that's what we did for tornado drills now that I think about it. And I guess we thought it was a tornado drill. Yeah, I remember someone in our class asking, I want to say it was me, but who knows with the human memory, right? Asking, is there a tornado coming? It's so nice outside. And the teacher going, we just have to be careful this morning. And I distinctly remember a different second grade teacher coming out, and it was clear she had just finished sobbing in the other room. None of us knew what was wrong, but none of us were misbehaving. It's funny, none of the talkative kids were talking, none of the troublemakers were making trouble. Everyone was on their best behavior, and no one had to tell us to be. Emotional intelligence, people underestimate how much of communication is just what's on your face. And what was on our teacher's face was a sign that we need to be quiet and listen to the adults this morning because something scary is going on. And that's all I remember from that day at school. What I do know is that I then went to daycare. My parents were professionals, and they couldn't get me until 5, but they had the money to pay for daycare, so they did. And the van for KinderCare in Mundelein, Illinois, picked me up. Took me to the daycare center, and I distinctly remember one thing is walking in after getting there, and my favorite daycare teacher, Mr. Vince, was there. That's what we called him, Mr. Vince. That's obviously not his last name. And one of the older kids who was like 12 or 13, he was talking to him like, I remember him saying, well, it's not like they're helicopters. You can't jump onto them. How can you steal a plane? And Mr. Vince saying to him, yeah, I don't know. They would have had to have gotten on with the other people. Actually, interesting side note, Mr. Vince was a tank commander in the First Gulf War. He had a lot of interesting stories and talked to us a lot after that day. Also taught me how to play Dungeons & Dragons. I'm getting off track here. And that's all I remember of that day at KinderCare. I remember that conversation because it was so weird. Why were they talking about stealing helicopters and airplanes? But I don't know. Played my Game Boy, ran around with a ball or something stupid. And my mom, of course, picked me up at about 5:30 as usual. She was very quiet in the car. I was sitting in the back seat, and she said, "Do you know what happened today?" And she asked it like almost it was a test question. Not that she was testing me, but she wasn't able to. She didn't know what emotion to show in asking that question because she didn't know if I knew yet, right? She didn't want to seem sad or happy. It's like a robot asked. And I said, "Was there a tornado?" She said, "We'll talk when we get home." So we get home. My mom's face, once we got home, was turning into the face I saw in Mr. Guide earlier that day. That somber, terrified, bringer of bad news face. And she sat me. I remember I sat on the floor, not on a chair, in the middle of the living room. And she turned on the TV. And, it was like out of a movie, just turning on the TV. This was the only story, clearly, obviously. And it was just a skyscraper on fire. And she was trying to hold back tears as she said, "We were attacked today." And I said, "Is that Chicago? Where we were attacked?" She said, "No, our country was attacked." And I don't remember when it happened while she was talking, but remember, when she turned on the TV, all I saw was a building on fire. And then eventually the clip played of the second airplane hitting a building. And by the end of the night, I had seen the clip of the towers falling. And that's what I remember from that day, if I'm being honest. There are a lot of other memories I have around 9/11, but those are the ones I'm sure happened on that day. I don't like to get my wires crossed. So now it's time for part 2. What I remember that I'm sure was probably not on 9/11, but was within the first year and a half. Following 9/11, I remember... A lot of people remember fear or confusion or anger. What I remember was the silence. Everyone seemed quieter for more than a week. Movies, no one went to the movies. What if they bombed the movies? No new episode of SNL this week. Although everyone remembers SNL came the next week pretty legendarily and had firefighters on stage. But even that intro monologue of that SNL episode was quiet. The famous joke of a firefighter asking Lorne Michaels, "Are we allowed to laugh?" And him saying yes. It's funny, though, that is how people remember SNL after 9/11. They remember firefighters on stage next to Lorne Michaels going, "Can we laugh?" And him saying yes. It's Saturday Night Live is remembered as the show must go on. But that's not what happened. That was the next episode. The episode that was supposed to be new that week wasn't new. And I remember the intro, new episode, like the announcement, rerun, new episode next week in front of the Statue of Liberty, helicopter camera panning over that and just going, "Oh." So that's no. I've always loved SNL, and it's very sad, even at 9 years old, that I didn't get to watch, Will Ferrell that weekend. That's what I remember about the first 2 weeks. It's just the silence. I know Lorne Michaels said we're allowed to laugh, but we weren't allowed to laugh until the second week. First week, everyone was quiet. And everyone said they were American. A Parisian newspaper was famous, in France for printing, "Today we are all Americans." Of course, those sentiments didn't last very long, France. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of quietness coming out of me right now, but that's what I'm trying to convey. how quiet America was. All these memories come rushing back to my head, actually, how like Zoolander, a famous comedy that did terrible when it came out. Well, it was because it was right after 9/11. No one went to the movies. No one went to do anything. Everyone was just quiet. And I don't remember being bored either. That's the weird thing. I just remember everyone staying safe. But then slowly it came back to us. The patriotism, the fervor. Again, I've always watched SNL since when I was little, so I remember, and again, for if I haven't made it clear, SNL is Saturday Night Live to people who are in other countries, maybe don't know, but which you probably do know, it's pretty famous. But I remember all these skits that for a liberal TV show were pretty pro-war, and I'm not. That's not me saying I wish they weren't, right? I just noticed that. Everyone knows I'm from the Midwest, and I have varied political views. But even Saturday Night Live was pro-war. Everyone was kind of pro-war. And it was weird in hindsight because I think people forget that there is a difference between pro-revenge and pro-war. I think we were just pro-war. We just wanted to invade people. And I remember, I don't even remember the invasion of Afghanistan. It just happened right away. What I remember is multiple times spending entire afternoons at school, real grade school, coloring cards for the troops in Afghanistan. Writing notes like, I hope you live, you're helping America, stay safe. One kid got in trouble for drawing the Twin Towers being hit by an airplane, saying, teach them a lesson. Although, to be honest, I think the teachers let us send those cards. Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, the teachers didn't care what we sent the troops. There were some pretty bloodthirsty messages drawn by kids, guys, I got to tell you. And they just sent them, probably saying, go for it. And it's understandable in the haze of war, but it's weird looking back on it. I can't imagine a teacher letting a kid in 2019 send a card to a soldier with the towers on fire saying, get them back for us or something. Like, that was literally what the kids were drawing. And, they probably learned it from their parents. I bet their parents weren't saying nice things about Afghanistan or people in the Middle East back then. I also remember just the roaring patriotism. There's this movie Spider-Man 2 where he gets on a web and swings in front of an American flag. And I thought it was funny even at the time because I knew what they were doing. I mean, look at this. This shoehorning in this American patriotism in there. To be honest, I don't think there was anything wrong with that. I mean, I remember people cheering in the movie theater. I remember all of these 9/11, flight, whatever it was, where the people overpower the terrorists on one flight over Pennsylvania, all that stuff. I remember all of these movies in 2002 coming out about 9/11 and going, how quickly can they make movies? Because that was quick. And I just remember that those are my memories, drawing cards for the soldiers. Every movie having a pro-American message. Now, again, not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's what I remember. It's certainly different than now, isn't it? And I do remember the war in Iraq. And I remember this because this is when things started to feel weird, in my opinion. I remember George Bush issuing the ultimatum, that Saddam had to follow, and if he didn't, we would invade within 24 hours. And I remember my mom tearing up looking at the TV, the United States, like it was showing a counter. It was on CNN. It was like showing a counter countdown. We had 1 hour left before we invaded Iraq. They didn't comply. I said, what's wrong, Mom? She said, well, we're going to war again, honey. And I said, yeah, but we're going to win easily, aren't we? And she said, well, it's still scary. What I remember actually about going to war in Iraq that I think is notable is how no one questioned it. I know. Everyone says that, they thought this or that, but I'm here to tell you no one I met and we lived in Chicago said anything but let's get them in Iraq. Everyone said that. Everyone said we should go to war in Iraq. And of course, in hindsight, we look back and go, that really didn't have to do with, Afghanistan made sense. That's where Al Qaeda was. It was a lawless territory that harbors terrorists, but Iraq really didn't make sense. I'm not saying it was wrong we invaded, to be clear. Actually, I could build a pretty robust argument for it being overall a good thing for the world that the U.S. invaded Iraq. Not saying I agree with that argument or don't agree. I'm just saying there is an argument. I want to be clear. I think people act like there isn't. There is an argument for that. But whatever you think about the war in Iraq, what I find bizarre is how wrong people remember us going there. There was no question. Everyone wanted to go to war. That really frustrated me, actually, too. But we'll get to that later. Yeah, everyone wanted to go to war. More war. Let's do it. Let's get them. Doesn't matter who them is. We're going to get them. And everything was American. And there was some niceness to that. People were nicer, I noticed, in public. And there are more American flags. My favorite color is red, so there's a lot of red on that flag. I like stars, too, so I like the flags being around. But, yeah. After 9/11, there was silence, then patriotism, and then it just seemed like wrath. There was so much wrath that someone had to pay, and then someone else had to pay. And you know what? Get a third guy in here. He has to pay. That's what I remember in the aftermath of 9/11. But now it's time for part 3. Is that how we remember 9/11 in reality? The silence? I don't think so. I think the narrative that survived is that America marched on. And we certainly did, but especially when you consider how long history is. A week isn't very long, but I think that's something to convey. How silent America, the loudest country with the loudest people on earth, was for one whole week after that happened. And how quickly we became patriotic and supportive of the troops. And then the support continued to the point where we would support anything. That seems to be what people want to remember, is that we got mad at 9/11 and then, we sent troops to Afghanistan and it wasn't enough, so we sent troops to Iraq. I think that's mostly true. I think for sure the Bush administration, and I do say administration because blaming George Bush for all of it is horseshit when, again, for those listening, do your own research. Maybe watch actually, Adam McKay did a fantastic movie called Vice. Maybe watch that just came out. That'll tell you what Dick Cheney was doing behind George Bush's back. Either way, though, I'm not defending him. The buck stopped somewhere, and he was the president. But the Bush administration definitely wanted to go into Iraq. And I guess one thing I want to talk about that I already touched on is how everyone says the Bush administration misleaded us, and that because of that, we went into a war we didn't need to go into, and blah, blah, blah. Well, let's address that. Whose fault is that in reality, right? Is that the Bush administration's fault for lying to us? They didn't lie that much. Or should I say, they didn't put that much effort into the lying. If you go back and look at it, it was very surface level stuff for any of the lies from coming out of Cheney. The Americans wanted to be lied to. We wanted more war. And that's something I think Americans haven't come to terms yet with. How much we wanted to shoot more people. So badly. I know there was lying, but it came from the Democrats and the Republicans for sure. Google it. Go look up Hillary Clinton's speech where she gives this fiery, impassioned thing. We must go to war in Iraq. Both the Democrats and the Republicans were telling everyone we had to go to war. You can try to blame the government for getting us to go to war, and I say the government, not the Republicans, because that's complete horseshit. There were some Democrats who were against it, and they are notable, so I'm not pretending some of them weren't, but most of the Democrats were for it. Most of the government was for going to war. But I don't know that I blame them. You know, the government wants to do more. That is what power wants. And the American people need to reckon with how easily we gave them power. I think that's one of my main points here. How easily Americans just nodded and said yes. Almost no one was looking at the facts or trying to look at the facts. We just said we're going to war here. They could have named any country. We probably would have said yes. You know, we just went along with it. And I think Americans need to reckon with that. America needs to reckon with the fact that it wasn't the government that misleaded us. We all misleaded ourselves into continuing to go to war. We are all partially responsible. Most of us are. That's something that I don't think has been taken account for. You can't blame Republicans. You can't blame George Bush. You can't blame Hillary Clinton. You can't blame all these people. We need to look deep inside ourselves and try to really remember, did you actually say we shouldn't go to war? Because everyone I met, left or right, was saying we should do it. I don't know. Look at the Patriot Act, giving up our rights for surveillance. Everyone just said yes so easily. I don't know. I still don't think America's reckoned with how much the everyday man and woman took part in misleading themselves. So that's one thing that I think we're getting wrong about remembering 9/11. Another thing is, well, let's talk about how Muslims were treated too. This is a touchy subject on a touchy podcast. Sorry. They're not softball subjects, people. So I'll speak for my own family. My parents were very open-minded, and they said right away, by the way, Tom, Muslims didn't do this. Bad people who happen to be Muslims did this. And my parents are actually conservative, so just keep that in mind. But they're open-minded conservatives. And when they saw that, they said, we can't blame Muslims. So I never did. And maybe it's because I lived in Chicago, but everyone I knew there wasn't blaming Muslims. I don't remember any of these words people say that I don't know what words I honestly don't know what slurs you call Muslims. What is it? Towel heads or I don't know. All that stuff. No one ever said that around where I lived, in my family. I just didn't see it. And I didn't see it on TV, not on the TV shows we watched. I mean, if you think of one of the biggest shows at the time, 24, the first season was about the Russian mafia, wasn't it? They didn't even touch on the Muslim, call it the Muslim season, quote unquote. Well, maybe the Middle Eastern terrorist season is what you should probably call it. Until multiple seasons into the show. I think it was third or fourth season. Yeah, they didn't do it right away because they were scared to. And, George Bush, to his credit, came out right away and said you can't blame Muslims either. Something I'm not sure our current or United States current president would do. I can't say that he would. But at least George Bush, I do believe. So I guess that leads me to, let's wrap this one up before I move to the next subject. I don't remember the Muslim backlash being as bad as some people say. And I know I am going to get a ton of flack for saying that controversial statement. But it was there. I know it was there. And it was probably in smaller towns. Look, I know. I know it happened. But I would push back on people comparing this to what happened in America after Pearl Harbor. Come on guys. 9/11 is directly comparable to Pearl Harbor. We ignored what was going on. We weren't prepared, even though we should have been. We got attacked. Thousands of people died, and then we went to war. And really, the war on terror is the World War II of this generation. Not as many deaths, but it lasts way longer. Yeah, I don't remember it being nearly as bad as, I mean, there were no internment camps, people. There were no internment camps. And, I mean, God, think about it. Japanese Americans in World War II had no connection to Japan besides their race, or really ethnicity. And, you know, Muslims called themselves Muslim, and the people in the towers called themselves Muslim. It wasn't the country. They said we were part of the same religion. No, they weren't. You know, Muslims in America would say that's not my version of Islam. But, you know, the connection, even though it's not a real connection, is quote-unquote closer. And there were no internment camps. I never saw anyone in school getting beaten up. But again, I went to school in Chicago, so I'm not saying it didn't happen. Please don't lynch me, people. I didn't say it didn't happen. I pushed back a little bit on the Muslim backlash. Any backlash that happened was quieter, and I think it happened, though. I do know in airports, though, I don't want to say understandably, but I don't know what you do, right? People get scared of other people. I do remember in airports, Islamic people being much, or Middle Eastern, should I say, let's say tan-skinned people, frankly, had a much greater chance of being flagged and searched. Yeah. Speaking of airports, I remember airports being really easy to go through until after 9/11. I don't know how much I have to add to that, but there, seriously, it was like you walked in and onto a plane with whatever you wanted. And then after 9/11, oh my God, it took 5 hours to get through an airport. It was terrible. It's actually a lot better now in 2019. But that's something a lot of people don't remember as well, that, well, we still have a lot of the safety measures in place that we implemented after 9/11. Going to an airport now, you should plan to be there an hour before it boards, and hopefully be to the gate 10, 15 minutes before it boards. Back then, you wanted to get to the airport 2 hours early because you didn't know how long it was going to take. That's actually gotten better. But past the airports, past what I think about what happened with the, Middle Eastern backlash and all this other stuff, I also want to touch on, how George Bush is portrayed a little bit as well. George Bush walked out and said the greatest way you can support this country is with a shopping cart. Now, I know a lot of people would say that's American materialism, but what he said is don't be afraid to go see those movies. Don't be afraid to keep going to the grocery store. The best thing we can do is not let them win. And I know it's a cliche now, but that was pretty good. And his approval rating went to near 100% for a reason. He immediately came out and said, we will not blame, Islamic, Muslim, Middle Eastern Americans for something they didn't do. He was very, very inclusive. These are things I don't think the Bush administration gets credit for. And he screwed up a lot of things later, and Iraq certainly didn't age well. But my point in bringing up Bush and all of this is people do forget the things he got right. I do think he got the aftermath of 9/11 right. A lot of people don't remember that. Not defending him as a good president, though. I'm just saying. I'm being objective. That is my perception that we got wrong in remembering 9/11. Another thing I think we got wrong, and at this point it's all controversy, but you know what? Deal with it. This is just, I'm not fact-checking. This is my objective memory here and my opinions. The idea that Iraq was better before we went there. This is a touchy subject that will probably deserve its own episode, but I just want to say something quick. Saddam Hussein killed over 500,000 people. ISIS has not. And ISIS is done. Like, if Saddam was still in power, he probably would have killed another 1 million over 10, 20 years. Because some of the worst stuff he did was actually before we invaded. That's when he lost a lot of military power, but made up for it by cracking down on civilians even harder. The idea that Iraq was better with Saddam is honest. It's not an insane notion. It's a factually incorrect notion. Now, is there a chance Iraq would have been better without American intervention? Maybe. There's a chance that might be true. But it's not a fact. It's not a fact that Iraq would be better off without American intervention. And I will follow that up by saying the way America handled Iraq was a complete clusterfuck and should have been done way better. So I'm not saying America was in any way right. What else? Well, one last thing I'll talk about is just how 9/11's just kind of become a reality, I think, for everyone that's under the age of 30. You know, my brother's 4 years younger than me. Those who are longtime listeners know his name is Dan. He admits he doesn't remember 9/11 pretty much at all. He remembers something happened that day, but that's about it. And yet it feels like he's lived through 9/11 1,000 times. This is the World War II of the millennial and now Gen Z generation. Well, mostly millennial, though. You know, people born between like 85 and 99. A tight generation, but an important generation for all of the world events that happened. The fall of the Soviet Union, followed by the War on Terror. The people old enough to remember a world barely without the internet, but also grew up with the internet. 9/11's always been there for us. And it's still there. And it doesn't seem like it's ever going to go away. You know, ISIS is just the new Al-Qaeda. We're still dealing with all this stuff. Yeah, I don't know that I have some grand conclusion to add to the end of this episode, to be honest, guys. I don't know what to tell you. I just thought it would be good to get out thoughts from someone who remembers a few things from that day well and has some opinions about things that went on. I gotta say that I will not be getting into any arguments with anyone in the comments section about this episode. This is one person's opinions and feelings. This is not the, I'm not looking at poll numbers and doing all this research. This is just my perception. What I saw happened, what it felt like happened afterwards, and how I just think we're still not remembering things correctly. When I say correctly, again, just to be clear, I'm not talking about my opinion. I'm saying no one seems to remember how quiet we were after 9/11. No one seems to remember how it wasn't the government that lied to us, but we wanted to be lied to. How every American who was of voting age at the time seemed completely complicit in the Iraq war. We all said yes. We all wanted to say yes. And we just thought Iraq looked like the right place. And you know what? The uncomfortable truth is that I'm not sure Iraq is worse off with America, even if we screwed up half of the war, than with Saddam, who gassed and murdered 500,000 people. May not be better, but I'm not sure it's worse. And it still feels like 9/11's with us. All right, so how about some closing thoughts? Like I've said a couple times, I think I'm going to catch flack for this, and it's because it comes from the heart. This is unfiltered, almost completely unedited. And I'm not hiding my opinions, This is just one person's testimonial who watched it happen at a young age, watched the aftermath, and then looks back on it. You give me a couple beers, this is what I tell you I think about Iraq, about 9/11, Saddam, Bush, what happened around that time period, popular culture. This is what I remember. So don't get mad at me and tell me I'm wrong, because I'm not necessarily saying I'm right. And most of what I said is my emotions and what I remember, and those can't be wrong, but they could be inaccurate. And I think that's kind of what I want to close on, that everyone needs to stop pretending they know everything about what happened in 9/11 and really reckon with the American soul. Who are we? What did happen? What did I actually see? What did I actually do on 9/11 and after? To the Democrats, most of you were for the war, and you were just as easy to scare into warmongering as the rest of us. We all were complicit. Republicans, I saw just as many Democrats waving American flags as Republicans. Everyone was waving American flags. Everyone was a patriot. We weren't as xenophobic as people think we were, but at the same time, we haven't dealt with the mistakes we made since then as well, including some xenophobic mistakes. I just don't know how it ends, 9/11, you know. And that's not a call to leave the Middle East. It's a call to really ask what we should be doing and what mistakes we actually made. And to actually, please, every American needs to take the time to look at themselves and ask, do I actually remember what happened correctly? And are we actually doing anything right now to account for mistakes that were made that led to 9/11 and the mistakes afterwards? I would ask the same of my European brethren as well. Are you actually sure you knew or know what it was like to be an American on 9/11? Or do you actually know what the repercussions were of the things that happened afterwards? We need to stop judging. The silence needs to end. Now is time for talking and honest discussion. I'll close from a quote from John F. Kennedy. The greater our knowledge increases, the more our ignorance unfolds. We keep getting more facts about what happened on 9/11, people. But I'm not sure we've actually learned the correct lessons yet. Thank you. Flyover States, Political Views Across the U.S. is brought to you by me, Tom, of Moore's Law is Dead and Flyover States. If you like my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find Flyover States there, and there will be a link in the description. I don't have any fancy tiers or goals, just the assumption that if you like my content, you'll pay me for what it's worth. That's all it's there for. It really does go a long way.